Hello.
Hello.
You're listening to The Full Blossom of the Evening, a podcast about David Lynch and Twin Peaks.
I'm Indigo.
And I'm Hilary.
Listeners, we're going to tell it to you, and we're going to tell it to you straight. Today, we're talking about Lewis Carroll's Alice books.
It was Laura, and I saw her glowing. I saw her smiling. I feel like I'm in a dream tonight.
So, first off, we just want to say a huge thank you to Counter Esperanto for having us on their podcast as a guest.
Yes, we were on their most recent episode to talk about Robert Aickman,
which was so much fun. We had so much fun doing it. They were so lovely to work with. And also, the text was just phenomenal to read.
Oh my goodness, they both turned us on to Robert Aickman this summer.
We are now huge fans.
And the two stories we discussed are some of my favorites.
Yeah, listeners, if you are not familiar, let us also push you onto this and, listen to the episode. You can hear us talk about these stories. There's so many collections of short stories. So also, even if we might spoil those two for you, there's a lot of other ones you can dive into.
Yes, because you're here, you're a David Lynch fan, you are going to adore this writer.
You really will. It's uncanny. It really is.
Well, today's episode is an Uncanny Resonance episode.
It is.
And today we are so excited to talk about Lewis Carroll's Alice books, both Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass and What Alice Found There.
Yes. And, we are not the only people that have noticed this, the similarities. There are Tumblr blogs. Colin Newman, the host of Blue Rose Brighton, a Lynchian discussion group, made this incredible art that we loved so much. The Redbubble is Traumatron. And we got these beautiful prints from him that we will absolutely be posting a picture of. Don't you worry.
Yeah, we know that this is something other people have recognized and talked about. And so we don't want to repeat what's already out there. There's lots of fun little details. People saying, oh, her cat's name is Dinah. And Cooper talks about Diane. So that's already been discussed. So we're hoping to get more thematic on this episode.
Yeah. And one of the big things is that this is something very personal to both of us. We both love Alice so much. These books are deeply important to us, and that's why we wanted to do it so much.
Should we talk for a second about our personal connections to Alice?
I think so. Why don't you go first?
Okay. So one of my earliest memories from childhood is writing a letter to Disney World. I wrote, Dear Disney World. I must have been about 7 years old because I wanted to tell them that I should play Alice.
And you were correct. You do look exactly like her.
I felt as though this was the way I could have a career goal that fit with my personal feelings.
Yes.
And I loved the Alice book so much. And it felt like this was right. This was the right fit because I could live out my dream of being Alice only in Disney World.
Yeah.
And I just remember writing this letter and really working very hard to print it neatly. And specifically looking up how to spell the word chrysanthemum for some reason. I felt I needed to include that, perhaps to show how serious I was.
Yes, you meant it.
And to their credit, they wrote me back.
Really?
And sent me a paper job application.
Oh.
And invited me to submit it when I was, I think, 16. And I just took that so seriously. For years, I believed that I was going to be going back and working at Disney World. And Disney wasn't such a behemoth corporation back then.
Yeah.
They could still take the time to send a job application to a 7-year-old. So,
which is what made them so special.
Pleasant memory. Yeah. And how about I have other stories. But
yeah. I think that's the thing is we could both talk all day about
extending well into adulthood. And
right.
yeah. But how about you?
Well, From a very young age, it was definitely a huge part of my childhood. Yeah, so I got this copy of the annotated Alice when I was 5, and it just changed my life. When I was a little kid, my mom would sing me Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Bat. Also, the Czechoslovakian Alice movie was like my favorite movie when I was a kid. That is the 1988 Alice by Jan Svenkmeyer, I think is how you say it. And it could be wrong, but if I am wrong, I'm so sorry. But that was hands down one of my favorite movies when I was a little kid. And I think there's something so relatable when you are like a stubborn, willful, imaginative child and you read this and you can just see yourself in it. And when we were sort of going over our notes, we were talking about the fact that it's because it portrays a real little girl.
Right.
It's not like a cardboard cutout being like, this is what good little girls look like and what they should do. It's like she is a real little girl.
And we were both American kids.
Yes.
In the 20th century, growing up, and we could still connect so deeply with Alice.
Right. Yeah. There's no dissonance there. It's even though obviously that would have been a different time period and a whole other country, we can still relate because he just nailed it.
He did. And I just want to acknowledge that about 30% of our audience at this point is from overseas and 10% of our audience is coming from the UK. So we know that Alice belongs to you all.
Yes. But we still really love her.
And we also know that the Alice books are deeply rooted in their time and place.
Yes.
They have a lot of satirical elements, not only to general UK politics at the time, but also to things very specifically happening in the town where Carroll's writing.
Yes.
So even without a full knowledge or appreciation of that very clever satire, we can still appreciate and enjoy the Alice books.
Yeah.
For what they do speak to us in this era.
Well, and that's the beauty of the annotated Alice is having that be my first copy and my first introduction to Alice. I admittedly at the time probably didn't understand all of the annotations until I was older. But as I got to read them and understand them and everything, it adds this extra element knowing how much care went into it because we've talked about that. You and I just personally have talked about how frustrating it is sometimes when folks have these ideas of the author behind Alice. Like they're like, oh, he was probably just like a crazy druggie.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, he was a really nice, quiet math professor who liked puzzles and, making these cute stories that would actually have, little symbols and allusions to things that his audience would understand.
And unlike our last episode, where we had no research whatsoever, really, no scholarship to go on for Good Times on Our Street, for the Alice books, there is more than we could possibly talk about.
It would take us years.
Yes. In fact, we think someone else should do a podcast on the Alice books.
Honestly.
Please do, so we can listen.
We'll be your biggest fans.
But because there is so much scholarship on Carroll and the Alice books, we've limited ourselves to the annotated Alice by Martin Gardner. Okay, so the way we organized our Lolita episode, what feels like a long time ago now, was in chapters. And we've decided to do that again for this discussion, but we have a prologue.
Because it's something that you might be asking yourselves. Because
why are we talking about the Alice books and not
Oz? Why
not the
Oz?
Wizard of Oz?
Because everyone just assumes, everyone knows Lynch and Oz, Lynch and Oz. We're not doing Lynch and Oz right now.
No, we're not. And we want to defend ourselves a bit. Why? Why? We are far more interested in Lynch and Carroll, Lynch and Wonderland, in a sense, instead of Lynch and Oz. So first off, you don't really have to have even seen the film The Wizard of Oz to recognize its presence in a lot of David Lynch's work, like Wild at Heart.
Oh, yeah.
You only need a passing familiarity with it. There's a documentary, Lynch Oz, that I guess touches on this. I haven't yet seen that. Have you?
No, I haven't.
Right. So we know this is already being discussed. We think it's actually quite interesting that Frank Baum, the author of the book on which The Wizard of Oz was based, was deeply influenced by Lewis Carroll. And so maybe by taking so much inspiration from The Wizard of Oz, Lynch has nudged even closer to the Alice books than to the American story that they inspired. It seems maybe, I think, Indigo, you said this, that Lynch was just more charmed by the imagery of Oz than the actual story.
Yeah, I think so, because it's so clear that when we do see examples of that in his work, it's the movie. He is drawn to the movie, and the book is very different. The book is very different, but he likes the color, the pop of it. What we see him show in his films that harkens back to Oz is always like that color, the costumes, some of that imagery and stuff, but not really the story. And we know that Lynch isn't like a huge reader either.
Right.
So like, I don't know that he necessarily is out there saying like, this is my favorite book per se, but we know that he loves the movie.
Right. But we do think that there's greater kinship between the worlds that Lynch creates and the worlds that Lewis Carroll creates. And that's very interesting to us. For one, as part of our prologue, we're calling this Mysteries, Not Secrets.
Yeah, and we had a lot of fun discussing this while we were planning this episode, because there's the difference between mysteries and secrets, and I think that Alice and Dorothy are a perfect example of this.
So Wonderland. So this is two books. We're talking about Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. Those worlds have different rules, different setups, but when we refer just generally to Wonderland, we mean the fantasy world created by Lewis Carroll.
Yes.
Right. So when we're comparing Wonderland and Oz, Indigo and I both think that Wonderland is far more intriguing than Oz.
Yes.
Oz is a fantasy world, but it still operates regularly on the rules established by its reality. I mean, in Oz, everyone's always explaining things to Dorothy in ways that make sense. And then the rules that she learns just consistently apply. And nothing like that exists in Lynch's world.
No,
and
certainly not in Wonderland.
Not in Wonderland at all.
Nothing really makes sense in Wonderland. It's fantasy. It's nonsense. It doesn't agree with the laws of physics. You have to run fast to stay still. It is a place of unsolvable riddles and constant discord between its inhabitants who can't seem to even agree with each other on the nature of their reality, the meaning of words, or how time even works, which is so Lynchian. Think about the conversations that characters have in Lynch's worlds, and it is a lot more similar to Wonderland than you might realize.
Absolutely. So much closer than Oz is. Right? Mulholland Drive, Twin Peaks, and Twin Peaks The Return, Inland Empire, Lost Highway, Eraserhead. I mean, all of these present worlds where the internal logic is very hard to discern.
Yeah.
It's contradictory, it's unresolvable, it suggests far more than it actually shows.
There's a lot that feels hidden and unknown, and just like will remain unknown, will remain unanswered. That's kind of the beauty that I think draws in a lot of people to Lynch's work, is that it's like, okay, so this could mean something else to every single one of us. We might all have different theories on what this all means.
I think, with Wonderland, we have this feeling that Alice could just keep exploring it forever, that it's boundless.
But Oz is very finite. It's, you can do a map of Oz.
Yeah.
You can't really do a map of Wonderland.
No, you can't.
The map of Wonderland would have to be one of those maps that has like crazy functions to it. Like if you fold it this way, then you can see that you end up in this other place. And like, maybe it has like pull out tabs or something. I don't know. It would have to be a lot more elaborate and also probably enchanted. to be able to really show it.
It would have to be like Hawk's Map in Twin Peaks. It's a living thing that's always changing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like really.
Or it's always current.
Yeah, because sometimes you go to the same place and it's somewhere else now.
Yeah.
You would have to draw, it would have to be like a map that is like 3D or like has multiple layers that just go up in the air or something.
I can absolutely see that Indigo the artist.
I know, my brain is like the gears are turning so
she has
quickly.
That look in her eyes right now.
There's like steam coming out of my ears right now, but only Hilary and my cats can see it.
I feel like I see what's going to happen for the rest of the week. You're going to be designing your Wonderland map.
Right, but Oz is just...
It's flat.
It's just like a regular map.
It's a regular map. It's a regular place. Nothing wrong with that, but it's not very Lynchian.
No, not at all.
I think some of the notes that we've made regarding the mysterious space of Lynch's world is like the Red Room with its corridors and rooms that Cooper goes down the hallway, so to speak, and is in what looks like the same room, but now it's a different room.
Right.
All of that just feels extremely Carrollian.
Yes, and also in Inland Empire, the scenes where Devin and Nikki are running through the set, because that happens a couple times, where it's like, they're like, oh, I see someone in the set, and they go to check it out. First, it's just Devin, and then the second time, it's both of them. And they're running through the darkened hallways. There's all these doors and windows, and there's no, like, once you're in it, it feels like a maze. It feels like, will they get out of here? That is so Carollian.
It is. And even when Nikki's then in the house and sees Devin through the window, and he cannot see her.
Yep.
They are on opposite sides of some sort of reality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That is so Wonderland.
It really is.
It's so Looking Glass world.
It is. Yeah. Yeah. It's as if she has gone through the looking glass in a sense. Ooh, I love that.
I know. I got chills a little bit.
Even back in Twin Peaks: The Return with the Mauve Zone and the Fireman's Palace, the Flying Dutchman, Philip Jeffries' room, all of these places could be straight out of Carroll's invention.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they're places where, again, it's this like physical location, but it doesn't actually feel fixed in space at all. It's a liminal space.
All right, our next point in this prologue of why we're not talking about Oz is about Alice versus Dorothy. So both Alice and Dorothy are the little girl protagonists in perhaps the defining children's stories of their respective countries.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Alice books and The Wizard of Oz are both portal fantasies where the little girl is swept away into another reality with its own culture, history, beauty, and danger. But Alice and Dorothy are really different from each other.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's kind of what we were saying at the start of this episode, is that Dorothy is that paper cut out of the perfect little girl who, she listens to the people around her. She follows the rules. But Alice is on her own journey, which makes her more real. She was written by an author who knew how children act, specifically little girls, and he knew what he was writing about.
And he liked little girls, genuinely liked them as friends.
Right. Yes. We want to clarify when we're saying this, it is believed that he was most likely asexual. And he really just genuinely, the little girls in particular that we're talking about were Alice Little and her sisters, who were often around the campus where he was working, and he genuinely saw them as his friends and his peers.
Yes. We have no sense that Lewis Carroll had an inappropriate relationship with these little girls, and the way Alice is portrayed in the book is never as a sexualized being.
No, it's so important because he doesn't infantilize her, but he also doesn't adultify her.
Right. He presents her as a child would be at this age.
Yes, which again, it's that she wants to explore. She wants to maybe be a little willful at times. But she's also thoughtful and imaginative.
She's a lot of things as a real person is. And that's such a contrast to Dorothy, who just is unfailingly polite, kind, dutiful, loyal, and so boring.
It's annoying a little bit.
If you only know Dorothy from the movie The Wizard of Oz, all of the charm and spunk of that character is entirely Judy Garland's invention and responsibility.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is why she was so wonderful for the role. And this is what we mean again with when Lynch is thinking of Oz, he's thinking of the movie.
Another thing that we note that's important about the contrast between these characters as pertains to Lynch is that Dorothy's only motivation is getting home to Kansas. It's gray, flat, dry, impoverished, and stressful.
Yeah.
And basically in the book, it's even less charming than in the film.
Yeah.
She's just surrounded by all this beauty and wonder and genuine friendship of Oz, and all she can think of the entire time is just getting home to Kansas.
Which is like, girl, maybe like stop and look around, and maybe you might realize it's actually like super cool to be there at all.
I know. From minute one, Dorothy is just like, well, I got to get home.
Yeah.
I got to get home.
She's like, I got to get home. My family's waiting for me.
And,
and
all of the urgency of Annie M potentially being sick or all of that, that's not in the book.
No.
So it's just she's got to get home to Kansas. And
for what?
if you've only encountered Alice from the Disney movie, the cartoon, Alice in Wonderland, that's a misrepresentation also of Alice, because that a little bit turns Alice into a Dorothy. That Alice is quite preoccupied with leaving Wonderland and getting home. And all of that is an invention as well. That is absolutely not the case.
No.
In Through the Looking Glass, Alice goes through the looking glass, is in the looking glass house, which is an inverse of her own home, and she, after kind of spending a little bit of time exploring there, deliberately leaves and runs away from it because she's concerned that they, probably adults, will make her go back through the looking glass and that her adventure will end. So,
and she doesn't want it to.
No, she wants to keep exploring.
She's not a Dorothy who is like, oh, I just got to get home. Alice is like, I want to explore as much as possible.
And I want to be queen.
Yeah, also that. Which, I mean, fair.
I know that Alice just pursues her curiosity and sense of adventure and not a return to the status quo, which is what Dorothy wants. Indigo, I'm going to quote you from our meeting where you said Dorothy is a victim and Alice is an adventurer.
Yeah, we don't see it as Dorothy's adventure as much as we see it as she's taken away from her home. What a tragedy. She's thrown into this unknown world, this unfamiliar world, and she just wants to get home. That's everything we know about the Oz world and franchise and all that. Is just like, it's just her being like, oh, I want to click my shoes and go home. Oh, wizard, please send me home. It's all about her wanting to get home. And Alice is like, I just want to party and be famous.
So anyway, while we've had fun joking about this is definitely one area where we both think Alice is far more Lynchian than Dorothy. So Alice is much more like our Lynchian heroines.
Oh, yeah.
In his portal fantasies, they are curious, imperfect explorers of other dimensions.
And they're blonde. I'm sorry, I just thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, Laura Palmer.
Yeah.
Unquestionably an example of this. But we're both very interested also in Inland Empire.
Yeah, with Nikki. And also, like, Betty from Mulholland Drive.
Yeah.
Like, we're looking at a lot of blonde, curious girls.
They really, very much so. Very much so. So the third point here in our prologue is there is no yellow brick road in Lynchland.
No, there's no clear path. Like, again, with Oz, it's like, oh, okay, you just have to go here and then go here and go here. There's a very clear map. There's a very clear, road and path to take. In Wonderland, that is not the case at all.
No.
It is, as we were kind of saying earlier, it's very much like you end up in this crazy hallway very often with like a bunch of doors. You don't know which one to pick. You go through one door and then the next thing you know, you're back in the hallway. It's like a lot of very confusing situations where you don't know what is going to happen next. You don't know what you're going to find next along your path, which again, it's not even really a path.
No,
you're just sort of
no.
stumbling around and hoping for the best.
Right. All Alice can do is follow her curiosity through both Wonderland and the Looking Glass world. And we like this dialogue between Alice and the Cheshire Cat. You can be Alice.
Would you tell me, please, which way I ought to go from here?
That depends a good deal on where you want to get to.
I don't much care where.
Then it doesn't much matter which way you go.
So long as I get somewhere.
Oh, you're sure to do that, if only you walk long enough.
So true.
So true. But that again, it's like, which way do I go? It doesn't matter. As long as that's so Wonderland. There is no yellow brick road.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, because in Oz, it's like, oh, Dorothy, you'll go here next. And also, a big thing is that Dorothy has a posse.
She does.
Alice is by herself.
She does. Yeah, she's got friends who are protecting her with their various gifts. And even then the flying monkeys come and help her out of other problems that the Scarecrow, Tin Man, and Lion can't.
Right.
And she is constantly protected. And Alice, it's only her curiosity and courage that are there to protect and guide her.
And at times her stubbornness and inner strength to keep pushing through situations or say, I'm not going to listen to this anymore. I'm going to walk away.
Right.
I'm not dealing with this nonsense or, whatever. Alice handles it with almost like a smugness at times.
She does. And we see Alice learning through trial and error. People don't just come out and explain things to Alice. Right. We see this with like the eating and drinking thing to grow smaller and larger. And she's the one who has to learn how much to eat and drink.
Yeah, she puts aside everything that we've ever taught children about don't just like eat or drink strange things. And she just does it. She's just like, I'm just going to test it out.
Alice meets almost no one helpful in either Wonderland or the Looking Glass world.
No.
But it's really her self-reliance that keeps her from being too distressed. And like you said, giving her a little bit of smugness.
Yeah.
Events throughout the Alice books change abruptly and move from square to square on the chessboard. It's kind of like how scenes in Inland Empire change abruptly and with very little discernible connection between them.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is Inland Empire is one of my favorite Lynch movies because I am such a dreamy, sleepy girl. I just love I love dreaming the day away because I think dreams are so fascinating, and it does it so perfectly.
Yeah.
Where it's just like, that is how it is when you're dreaming. You will be in the middle of one story and then suddenly you get sucked off to somewhere else, and suddenly you're in this entire different situation, different characters are there, and Inland Empire shows that so perfectly. And then sometimes you end up back at a different one. You're like, wait, I was here before with the rabbits. I'm back here with the rabbits.
I recognize this hallway. And in the Looking Glass world, because it's set up as a chessboard and Alice is moving abruptly from one square to another, and each square kind of has its own dimension, own characteristics, that feels very Inland Empire too.
Oh, yes.
That kind of abrupt shift from location to location. But, I mean, it's almost like Nikki's kind of lost in a darkest timeline, Wonderland, in Inland Empire. But I think a parallel we can see there is even after her death scene, when she's basically invited home. Yeah. Right? Like, cut. And everyone's applauding her. She doesn't snap out of it. Right. She's not done exploring.
No. She gets up and she just keeps walking around. And I rewatched it and made some notes. And my note at the ending was just, the ending goes from dream to dream. Who is dreaming? It's so quick.
That's well said. Yeah, I think that if Nikki Grace was a Dorothy figure, that death scene when she realizes, this isn't real, this was, quote, just a dream, or just a scene of acting, she would wake up and joyfully return, but she knows the adventure is not over. Right. For better or for worse, there is still more to explore. Right. And sort out. So.
And stories that need endings and resolution.
Yeah.
And she's
a debt
moving
that
through.
Needs to be paid. Our final point on this, why we're talking about Wonderland through the looking glass worlds instead of Oz is finally the generalized undercurrent of menace that we see in both Carroll's worlds and in Lynch's universes.
Yeah. Again, it's so like the terror in Oz is clearly defined and localized. It is easy to name and point out and be like, oh, there's a witch, there are monsters like the Khalida, there are these very specific things. But again, Dorothy gets through them with the help of her friends. Alice, again, she's on her own, and there aren't really necessarily there's a lot of situations where you can't tell if someone is a friend or a foe.
Yeah,
even by the end of the interaction, you're still left wondering.
The menace is very diffuse, but it's pervasive.
Yeah.
It's everywhere. Yeah. I mean, almost everything in Wonderland is at least somewhat menacing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, where Oz is a world of goodness and wickedness, and Dorothy just has to learn what's good and bad within it.
Yeah, and Alice is just relying on her interactions, which again are very like flawed and unpredictable, hoping that she can get the information she needs to navigate Wonderland. She's just trying to figure out how she's going to move through this world. But she can't really rely on anything. She can't rely on these interactions in the way that Dorothy can.
Right. I mean, she needs them to get information, but she can't rely on them. And we think that is far more Lynchian.
Yes.
Yeah. For one, we're thinking about those very ambiguous Red Room figures.
Yeah.
Bob, clear evil, clear bad.
Right. And then, we have the little man from another place, and like the arm, and that seems like negative, but not necessarily evil in the way that Bob is.
Right. And the little man is still there sometimes to provide necessary information.
Yes.
He's not entirely a menace.
No, but it's just the unnerving quality of the way that he speaks, that there is that hesitation you feel.
Sure. And he has a doppelganger, right?
Yes.
Especially in Twin Peaks: The Return.
Yes.
And the doppelganger of the evolution of the arm seems to have negative intent in sending Cooper into non-existence or whatever. But it's much, much harder to define who is good and evil. Mike / Philip Gerard is definitely in a gray area. Not so much in The Return, where he seems to work for Cooper's benefit, but at the end of Fire Walk with Me, right? He's demanding Garmonbozia from Bob. So the giant, right? He seems like an amazingly good figure.
Right.
But then he's in the Red Room in the final episode of the original series, and why is he there with these other figures that are more ambiguous?
Right, especially for all the times that it feels like he's coming to Coop with visions and help.
Yes. So I think that in Eraserhead, we see a world that is just so menacing.
Yeah, I mean, a baby is something that should be, so delightful and pure, and then that is whatever we want to say that is.
Right. There's no comfort or rest or anything in that world. The ominous sounds, just the whole feeling of threat.
It's very oppressive. Yeah,
very
all the
oppressive.
sounds.
Even the lady in the radiator, who is our most comforting presence,
yeah,
she's physically deformed and she's squishing umbilical cords.
Right.
with her feet.
And she's supposed to be kind of like our angel in a way.
Right. So there is even that little bit of an undercurrent of menace in that character.
Right. And with Mulholland Drive, the way that they, treat each other with a lot of care at times, but there is this sense of dread that, then comes to unravel, and we see the darker underbelly of their sort of flip sides.
And there is that sense of dread, with like Louise Bonner, the neighbor, coming in and giving that ominous declaration that someone's in trouble.
Right. Like, what would you even do if you were actually in that situation? I would be like, no, please, just go away.
We just have increasingly this sense that something is wrong, something is off there. So if you combine the mystery that we talked about in the first part with this menace, you get something that's both very Carollian and very Lynchian. My favorite of these, mystery and menace combined, is in Twin Peaks: The Return, when Bobby goes out to the gunshot from the car, and the woman's screaming and honking her horn, and the vomiting girl. That is both mystery and menace.
It's like, why is this happening? What's going on?
Yes. And that could be right out of a darker Lewis Carroll story.
Yeah.
Both the rage of the driver and the inexplicability of that scene.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there are a lot of characters in Wonderland that have like a lot of aggression to them too. I mean, obviously, like the Queen of Hearts, that is like one of the iconic characters that people know even if they haven't read it or haven't seen the movie or whatever. They know, they're like, oh, she's like mean, right? And it's like, yeah, she's like kind of off her rocker.
Right. Just constantly enraged for no clear reason. Yeah. The first half of Fire Walk with Me, like in the Fat Trout Trailer Park, Hap's Diner, that definitely combines the mystery and the menace as well, I think. Club Silencio.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, because you have
Drive.
the beauty of Rebecca Del Rio's song, but then there's also, when they start trembling and like all of like the lighting and everything starts to become very intense.
Yeah. Okay, so I think the first of our regular chapters will be our favorite Carrollian characters in Lynch.
So I definitely want to talk about Grace Zabriskie as the neighbor in Inland Empire, because I mean, it's like that is one of the early scenes in the movie, and it leaves such an impact. Like, I remember the first time I saw it, I was just like gritting my teeth the whole time, like, oh God, what's she gonna do? Because it's again talking about that kind of like menacing quality, but it's all within riddles, and which makes it almost worse because you're like, I wish you would just like come out and say if you're gonna hurt me or not. But instead she's like, who can say like what tomorrow is? And again, it plays with that time, which is such a Carollian figure, quality is this, what is time? What time is real? Like what is the actual truth of things? But yeah, it's just the way that she talks to Nikki is within all these riddles. And Nikki even says, she's like, I don't like the way you're talking. I think you should leave. And that conversation isn't even resolved in that scene because then she just points and she's like, don't you see yourself over there?
Yeah.
And Nikki looks and then we're somewhere else.
Right.
Which again is so like, that is Wonderland traveled to a T for you. Like Looking Glass Wonderland, traveling from situation to situation, that is spot on for that. And again, it's like she's got this, she seems silly at first, maybe even because it's such an over the top kind of character.
Sure.
But then as she goes on talking, you're like, oh wait, this is actually a bit menacing and uncertain. And that is how a lot of Carollian characters come across.
Yes. There are definitely things about that neighbor's character that resemble the White Queen in Through the Looking Glass. The White Queen tells Alice about the benefits of living backwards and remembering things that haven't happened yet. And then like she hurts her finger. Or she cries out because she's going to hurt her finger. And then when she actually hurts her finger, she doesn't cry out. And so the neighbor's inversion of time and fluidity of time seems very much like that character.
Yeah, because she's like, I heard you got the part. And she's like, oh, I don't know that I got it yet. Like I'm in the running for it. And she's like, no, you got the part. Don't you see it? Like, and she's like, what?
It feels very White Queenish too. I think another cool thing about that character is that her story has this, I think it's an accident, but it's a happy one, that echoes Sylvie and Bruno, another story by Lewis Carroll. Sylvie and Bruno begins with a crowd in the marketplace zigzagging their way to the palace. And
Which is literally what she says, and then there's like a variation of the story, and this one is a little girl with the marketplace.
Not through the marketplace, but behind it, the alley on the way to the palace. Yeah, it's neat that language is an echo, an inadvertent echo, perhaps from Carroll.
Yeah.
Another Carolian character that I think we both really love is Wyndham Earle, right? He's almost absurdly surrounded by Carolian imagery.
Yes. Oh my God, yes.
There's the whole chess game, which, listeners, if you haven't read Through the Looking Glass for a long time, the whole premise of that story is that Looking Glass world is set out like a chessboard, and Alice is moving from square to square, meeting chess pieces. So Wyndham Earle's use of a chess game, and then even dressing up a character who he murders as a pawn. Also, using playing cards.
Right, which is everyone knows is Wonderland.
Very much so.
It's about the queens, too.
It is.
Which is important to Alice.
There's also a playful and silly quality to Wyndham Earle, which is also quite menacing and dangerous.
Yeah, it's like this manic but menacing, which is a lot of characters in Wonderland.
Yeah, he even dresses up like a horse, and like wanders through the woods. That's as if Major Briggs is, lost in Wonderland and encounters this figure. But similar in another sense to Lewis Carroll is how quickly he's dispatched. In Wonderland, even the Queen of Hearts, who feels like this rather terrifying antagonist.
Yeah, she's like the final boss.
Yeah, she wants to decapitate everyone, including Alice. Alice just dismisses her. You're nothing but a pack of cards.
Right.
Like, this is silly. And for all of Wyndham Earle's threat that we feel from him in Twin Peaks, he's just so easily dispatched by Bob.
Yeah. And most of these like ultimate villains in Lynch's world and Lynch's work are also like that. Like it is also like the Phantom in Inland Empire, Bob in The Return, like a lot of these characters that we spend so much time building up as these like unstoppable forces are actually quite easily undone.
Yes. Yeah, in Inland Empire, she just shoots him from a distance.
Yeah.
A few times, but still.
Yeah.
You're right. As final bosses go, it's nothing too dramatic.
Yeah, and another one for sure would be the Mystery Man. I mean, again, it is that unnerving kind of riddle speak when he shows up and he's just like, you invited me.
Yeah.
And it's like, what? No. It's like, I mean, even just like the act of being like, like call, do it. And it's something that normally would make no sense.
Right. Or that wouldn't be threatening on the surface whatsoever.
Yeah.
That just, it would be an odd situation, but it wouldn't have that feeling of imminent doom that it definitely has in that scene.
Right. Which I know one thing that we talked about that it's just kind of coming back to me. The thing that is so interesting about Alice in comparison to a lot of other children's books that have had adaptations and stuff, Alice is one of those books that has inspired so many deeply dark adaptations. Like the American McGee's Alice video games, a lot of like the movie adaptations, they make them very dark and twisted, gory. And that's something that doesn't necessarily happen with like Winnie the Pooh or anything like that. Like any of those children's books or like Peter Rabbit, we don't have like the bloody gory version of Peter Rabbit, but we do with Alice.
I think there was a recent adaptation of Winnie the Pooh that was a horror movie.
No, really?
Yeah. But the thing is, that seems absurd and contrived.
It does. With Alice, it doesn't seem absurd.
With Alice, it feels very of a piece.
We're just like,
with the original text.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like one of my favorite adaptations is the movie Malice in Wonderland, which it's like, it just kind of makes it like dark and gritty, and it's a lot of fun. But yeah, it's like you don't often get those dark and gritty reboots or adaptations. But, if you do, then yeah, it seems absurd. You're just like, that's not what that is. But with Alice, you're like, oh, yeah, you're so right.
And so thinking about these favorite Carollian characters in Lynch movies, it's not a stretch. They could just be present in these books.
They would
as well.
fit right in.
They really would. So next, we're going to talk about mirrors, inversions, and doubles that both appear so much in Lynch world, but of course are a big part of the Alice books as well. For one, the mirror is the portal for Alice. In Twin Peaks, mirrors offer a vision to the other world, if not a portal. But Indigo, you made a great observation about the Twin Peaks portal.
Yeah, the portal to the Black Lodge, that I'm sure listeners, you can picture this in your mind because it's such an image, that black pool. It's such an interesting one because when you look at it, it is almost like a perfect combination of Alice's two portals, the rabbit hole, and also a looking glass, a mirror, because the hole is filled with this mirror-like liquid substance. So when we look at the image of it, it is so fascinating. And talking again about that, the artwork that we got prints of by Colin Newman, it does a very good job of showing that and making that work. And the other thing that is in that print that I think works so well too is like the curtains.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, because that's a big part of Alice's portal experience too. Once she's down the rabbit hole, to find that door, she has to part the curtains.
Which we'll post pictures of comparing all these images, so don't you worry.
So, but we see getting into the Black Lodge means going to Glastonbury Grove, where you see what could be akin to a rabbit hole that has a mirrored surface, potentially, because it's a liquid, and the red curtains appear. It brings together all of these images from Carroll as another kind of portal.
Definitely.
Here in Twin Peaks. Yeah. Now, of course, in speaking of inversions, when Alice travels through the looking glass into this inverted world, she has to learn all the natural laws of the looking glass world. And so you have to run fast to stand still. You have to walk in the opposite direction of where you want to go. And I think that we can see a similarity in the way Cooper, once he is in the Red Room, has to learn the rules of how that world works. And most obviously, we have the backwards talking.
Yeah. Which also, again, it's very much something that we could see happening in Wonderland. That there's already so many of them that talk in strange ways. And so it comes as no surprise.
Right. And even one of the first things Alice encounters when she's through the looking glass is the book where she finds the poem Jabberwocky.
Yes.
Which is very famous. And did this haunt your childhood too?
A little bit. Yeah. Just a little bit.
But I couldn't look away. Like I was simultaneously horrified by the image of the Jabberwock, but also delighted by it. So
it's so bizarre looking.
It's printed backwards, and Alice has to hold it up to a mirror in order to read it. What a lovely parallel to the backwards talking in the Red Room, where the actors learn to say those words backwards,
right? And
then Lynch plays them reversed again. So Alice reads Jabberwocky, and her reaction to it, I thought, felt very Lynchian. So this is in Through the Looking Glass. She says, "It seems very pretty," she said when she had finished it, "but it's rather hard to understand. You see, she didn't like to confess even to herself that she couldn't make it out at all. Somehow it seems to fill my head with ideas. Only I don't exactly know what they are. However, somebody killed something. That's clear at any rate." And I thought that David Lynch would so approve of Alice's reaction there.
Yeah.
Like, it fills my head with ideas. I don't have to know exactly what it means.
Yeah.
I can pick out some parts of the plot here, but enjoying the thing for the mystery that it creates, as opposed to the clarity of its narrative, feels very, very Lynchian to us.
Yes, very much so.
Though, just back to the backwards talking, Alice is not reversed in the Looking Glass world, just as Cooper isn't. His speech isn't reversed.
They're strangers in a strange land.
Yeah.
So we've talked a bit about now, like the inversions, but let's talk about the doubles. So obviously the big one that people will recognize from Alice in Wonderland is going to be Tweedledee and Tweedledum. And Gardner points out that they are enantiomorphs, and which is a mirror image form of each other. They extend opposite hands to shake Alice's. And we, of course, see so many doubles in Lynch's world. Obviously, we've got doppelgangers.
Tulpas.
Yeah. and there's a lot of times where we've got characters where they are seeing themselves, and how unnerving that can be.
Right. Yeah, we have a lot of these like undefined doubles as well, because Laura sees herself in that picture that the Tremont Chalfonts give her. Diane sees herself outside of the motel in part 18 of The Return. So these don't seem to be doppelgangers or tulpas.
Right.
They're just these undefined doubles, which feel very Carrollian too. But of course also in Inland Empire.
Yeah, there are a number of times where Nikki sees herself. Like even like that's like one of the, again, that early scene with the neighbor woman coming over. She's like, "Do you see yourself over there?" Nikki looks, sees herself on the couch, and that's how we enter the next scene.
Right. And then, of course, in Lost Highway, we have the Alice Renee doubles as well.
Right.
More or less undefined doubles.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah.
And speaking of Alice and Renee, let's talk about names.
Oh, sure. We have a chapter.
Yeah, we do.
What is your name? Because as in Lynch, names are a big part of Wonderland and the Looking Glass world. So in Through the Looking Glass, there is the wood where things have no names. Similarly, in the Wonderland story, there's the caterpillar questioning Alice on her name.
Yeah, because there is a lot of general discussion around Alice of like who are you? And she doesn't necessarily have all the answers for that either.
Right, because she's like, I keep changing.
Right.
I don't have an answer. And so when we think about Inland Empire with that, and Nikki / Susan, when she is which character is so unclear.
Right.
She's changing a lot as an individual throughout that story, and doesn't seem to know who she is maybe at each moment. And we certainly don't as the audience.
Right. Yeah. And then we've got, like the comparison of like Betty and Rita versus Diane and Camilla. We've got Fred and Pete versus Renee and Alice.
Yeah. Laura Palmer and Carrie Page. Elsewhere in Twin Peaks, we have Mike versus Philip Gerard, the giant, whose then name appears as a series of question marks, and then later as the fireman. So this issue of what the name signifies and who you are in each moment relating to your name.
And we also have names with no clear entity.
Yeah, in David Lynch. Yeah, so obviously Judy. We have a name,
right? But
who or what is Judy? And then names with shifting entities.
Yeah, like the Chalfonts and the Tremonts. Like it's, again, with there's so much discussion in the Alice books of like, who are you and what makes you you, and so it works because we've got this main character of a little girl who's trying to figure out those things, as most little girls are. They're trying to navigate that, and so there is a lot of shifting, there is a lot of change.
Yeah, definitely. So our next chapter is something very specific, I think, from both Lynch's work and the Alice books. I like the title for this chapter, The White Knight's Move Ends. I mean, the White Knight, Cooper, is often described and criticized for having White Knight syndrome. Right. And that's the idea that you have to save the damsel in distress at all costs, even if perhaps it's reckless or foolish. And I know that he's described as having White Knight syndrome without the Alice books in mind.
Yeah.
But there is a White Knight in Through the Looking Glass.
There is.
And interestingly, the White Knight character in Through the Looking Glass is a surrogate for Carroll.
Yeah.
He's like an avatar for Carroll himself, just like Cooper is an author surrogate for David Lynch.
Right.
Yeah. And so both of these characters, both the White Knight in Through the Looking Glass and Cooper, are compelled to assist the female protagonist on a critical leg of her journey. So in Twin Peaks: The Return, in parts 17 and 18, we see Cooper compelled to go find Lara and literally lead her through the woods, which is also what the White Knight does in Through the Looking Glass.
Yeah, and like Alice is, we talked about Alice is often on her own, as opposed to like Dorothy, and Laura is also very much on her own in this. It's such a lonely journey for her, and Cooper and the White Knight, like these are the characters that come to take them by the hand and give them some guidance and try to help them.
Right. And Through the Looking Glass, Alice is taken prisoner.
Yeah.
In that moment. Then the White Knight comes and battles for her, and then his job is to see her through the square, see her to the end of the woods, where she will then become queen. And that's when his move ends, because he's a chess piece, of course.
Right.
So I like this idea of the White Knight's move ending like Cooper's move will end when he successfully takes Lara through the woods or from Odessa back to Twin Peaks. That he has fulfilled his role in that moment. There are other interesting Carrollian parallels here, though. His insistence on bringing, Cooper's insistence on bringing Lara home by going back in time echoes something from Sylvie and Bruno, another Carroll story. There's a professor in that who invents what's called the outlandish watch. And it's a watch that allows one to travel back in time, but frustratingly, not to prevent bad things from happening. So when the narrator of Sylvie and Bruno realizes the nature of the outlandish watch, he says, "Oh, mocking magic watch, the good I fancied I could do is vanished like a dream. The evil of this troublesome world is the only abiding reality." Oof. Right, so we see Cooper go back in time to try to save Lara, and she's torn away from him in the woods through some sort of mysterious force. We can almost imagine him uttering that line there.
Yeah, it's like, you've made such a great effort and tried so hard, only to have it ripped away from you.
Yeah. The White Knight in the Alice book, he's a really absurd figure. So he's invented this box for carrying his clothes, but it's upside down and the lid is open, and he has a beehive that he hopes bees will move into and produce honey, like on his horse. He also has a mousetrap on his horse in case mice come onto his horse. Right? That's not going to happen.
Right.
But the horse has anklets to prevent shark bites.
Also not likely.
And his quote is, "It's as well to be provided for anything." He is just completely earnest in all of this absurdity. And although Cooper is a less absurd character by a lot, there is a sweetness in the similarity of their earnestness and their preparation.
And he's also got like a bit of like Andy to him. Like that's the thing. Like there are a lot of really like earnest but sometimes silly characters especially in Twin Peaks.
Yes. He keeps falling off his horse as this is the White Knight again. He keeps falling off his horse, but he believes he's actually a good rider.
So much faith in himself.
There's a moment where he falls into this ditch while he's telling Alice's story, and Alice is in the act of dragging him out of this ditch, and only his feet are sticking out. Like his entire head is submerged. But he's still talking. He's still telling the story, and she's surprised, and he says, "What does it matter where my body happens to be? My mind goes on working all the same." It's in a sense so Cooper, perhaps. He's he's out of time, right? He's
Yeah.
physically out of time by the end of Twin Peaks: The Return. And there may be a clumsiness in his actions that he is not aware of.
Yeah.
You know, we as viewers are worried about Cooper at the end of Twin Peaks: The Return. He's so determined to make this happen. He goes into this Odessa world and he's single-mindedly trying to find Laura and take her back. It's not, it feels misguided. It feels like he's on the wrong path somehow, or it can feel that way. But he's not aware.
Yeah.
Not until that last moment when he says, "What year is this?"
Right.
does he seem to have any doubt that he knows exactly what needs to be done. But there is perhaps this inherent, maybe clumsiness in his actions that would echo the white knight.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I have a thesis for this idea. That maybe Cooper has mistaken Laura for a Dorothy.
Yeah.
But Laura is an Alice. You know, he wants to take Laura home. But home is not a place of refuge and comfort for Laura Palmer.
No.
Maybe his error is he's in the wrong story. He thinks he's the Wizard of Oz.
Right.
He's taking Laura back home. But Laura is Alice. And all he can do is take her to the next square.
Yeah.
And then his turn ends. He's aged,
Yeah.
like the White Knight is old.
Yeah.
He's kind of clumsy. He's a little bit absurd, and he just doesn't realize it.
Right.
I know.
Yeah. It's just he's guided by that earnestness and not logic. He is, I mean, more than anything, he is a dreamer, and that leads us to our final closing topic, which is, who is the dreamer?
Which dreamed it? Questions posed in both Lewis Carroll and, of course, Twin Peaks: The Return, and probably many other Lynch works.
Yes.
This notion of who is the dreamer? When are we dreaming?
So at this point, we want to share a passage from Through the Looking Glass and what Alice found there, because it is just too spot on.
So Alice is with Tweedledee and Tweedledum, and they notice the sound of the Red King snoring. And Tweedledee says to Alice about the Red King, he's dreaming now. And what do you think he's dreaming about?
Alice said, "Nobody can guess that."
Why, about you, Tweedledee exclaimed, clapping his hands triumphantly. And if he left off dreaming about you, where do you suppose you'd be?
"Where I am now, of course," said Alice.
Not you, Tweedledee retorted contemptuously. You'd be nowhere. Why, you're only a sort of thing in his dream. If that king was to wake, added Tweedledum, you'd go out, bang, just like a candle.
"I shouldn't," Alice exclaimed indignantly. "Besides, if I'm only a sort of thing in his dream, what are you, I should like to know?"
Ditto, said Tweedledum. Ditto, ditto, cried Tweedledee.
He shouted this so loud that Alice couldn't help saying, "Hush! You'll be waking him. I'm afraid if you make so much noise."
Well, it's no use your talking about waking him, said Tweedledum, when you're only one of the things in his dream. You know very well you're not real.
"I am real," said Alice, and began to cry.
You won't make yourself a bit realer by crying, Tweedledee remarked. There's nothing to cry about.
"If I wasn't real," Alice said, half laughing through her tears, it all seemed so ridiculous, "I shouldn't be able to cry."
I hope you don't suppose those are real tears. We'll end there because that's basically where Alice ends the argument too.
Mm-hmm.
And this idea that this whole thing is a dream but not her dream is...
Which it's tough and confusing when you feel like you're the main character.
Yeah.
It's Alice's adventures, and yet is she even really in charge here?
This is one of the few times that Alice cries too.
Yeah. Because, I mean, that especially for like a child, I think when you really question like their reality and things like that, I mean, how disorienting that must be.
Yeah.
When you just keep pushing it, saying like, you're not real, How is a child supposed to take that?
Yeah. Gardner's note on this scene is that it plunges poor Alice into grim metaphysical waters. The Tweedle brothers defend Bishop Berkeley's view that all material objects, including ourselves, are only sorts of things in the mind of God. That's quite a lot for a 7-year-old girl to contemplate, for sure. This theme comes up again in Sylvie and Bruno, another, not an Alice story, but still a Carroll story, where Bruno contemplates this issue of dream worlds and reality. He says, so either I've been dreaming about Sylvie, and this is the reality, or else I've been with Sylvie, and this is a dream. Is life itself a dream, I wonder?
And this is a theme that comes up a lot with Carroll. So one of my favorite poems by him is an acrostic that he wrote for Alice Little, the girl who inspired the story. And the last couple lines go right with that. In a wonderland they lie, dreaming as the days go by, dreaming as the summers die, ever drifting down the stream, lingering in the golden gleam. Life, what is it but a dream?
So this idea of who is the dreamer? Is this a dream?
Is all of life just a dream?
Is Twin Peaks: The Return just a dream? And
is Mulholland Drive just a dream? Is Inland Empire just a dream?
And who is the dreamer?
Who's dreaming all of these? I mean, obviously a little bit David, but like in the context, in the characters, who can say?
And those are fun debates to have.
Yeah.
But I think just as in the Alice books, it's the question that's more interesting than the answer or the proposed answer. Because the last chapter of Through the Looking Glass is which dreamed it. And it ends with Alice, teasing the kittens who were the stand-ins for the white and red queens in the story. And she's telling the cat, now, Kitty, let's consider who it was that dreamed it all. This is a serious question, my dear. And it's very, very cute. But she's asking the kitten, was it me or was it the Red King? But then it ends with, but the provoking kitten only began on the other paw and pretended it hadn't heard the question. Which do you think it was? And I love that Carroll leaves us with that question, just in the way that Lynch does.
Right. Yeah, we're left with questions more than answers.
And so while that wraps up our topics of comparison, I think it's worth noting that Carroll deeply inspired 2 other figures who inspired Lynch. And one of those is Franz Kafka.
Yeah, I mean, so as we kind of mentioned earlier on in the episode, Baum was inspired by Lewis Carroll. There are multiple, artists and writers that have inspired Lynch that were inspired by Carroll. It all sort of traces back.
Yeah, and so Franz Kafka's The Castle picked up with the chess game that was a big part of Through the Looking Glass. And his book, The Trial, connects with the trial that's in Wonderland. He was inspired by both books of Lewis Carroll's for those texts. And then there's another.
There is also T.S. Eliot's 4 quartets.
T.S. Eliot revealed to the critic Louis L. Martz that he was thinking of this moment in Alice in Wonderland when Alice is trying to get through the little door. She can see into the garden. When he wrote these lines, "Time present and time past are both perhaps present in time future, and time future contained in time past. If all time is eternally present, all time is unredeemable. What might have been is an abstraction, remaining a perpetual possibility only in a world of speculation. What might have been and what has been point to one end, which is always present. Footfalls echo in the memory, down the passage which we did not take, towards the door we never opened, into the rose garden." Those lines from T.S. Eliot's 4 quartets were inspired by this exact scene in Alice in Wonderland.
love it.
Doesn't that
my
language
gosh.
sound very Twin Peaks The Return?
So very much.
But there's another important point about the four quartets, right?
Mm-hmm. Audrey.
Yeah. When Audrey first appears in Twin Peaks The Return, there's a bookshelf behind her head, and one of the books prominently displayed is T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets.
Which, of course, Hilary, being the amazing eye for details, saw that and immediately got a copy, started reading it, and was like, oh my gosh, this pulls everything together.
So, listeners, we are planning, not for our next episode, but for our next episode. So the next episode is going to be on The Wild One. Mm-hmm. But after that, we are doing what we imagine will be a 2-part episode.
Yes.
On T.S. Eliot's The Four Quartets and Twin Peaks The Return.
Yeah. This will also be our first 2-parter, which is really exciting.
Yeah. So we hope you'll join us for our next episode, definitely, on The Wild One and Wally Brando, but also look forward to those episodes on The Four Quartets.
Yes. And also in the meantime, if you guys feel so inclined to rate our podcast and leave reviews and stuff, it actually helps a lot. We've already been so lucky to get such wonderful feedback from you guys. It really means so much to us.
So before we sign off, we had a funny thing happen when we were opening our old copies of the annotated Alice, and one of them was Indigo found a poem.
I did. As you know, we love poems here, and I guess I know that I got this when I was in college. It was a poem for a class. And I guess I must have tucked it away in my copy. I must have been on a reread and tucked it away and then just forgot about it. It was just randomly in there. And so then when we reopened our copies to start prepping for this episode, it fell out. And I went, oh my goodness, what are you? And it's actually eerily spot on for the content.
Perfect. And so you're going to read this for us.
Yes.
Yeah.
So for 2 reasons, this really jumps out as an eerie coincidence, because the author of this poem is Kathleen Lynch. I don't know if there's any relation, but it's spooky that it's spooky for that name. And the title is How to Build an Owl.
Wonderful.
Lynch and owl falling out of my Alice book when we go to prep for this episode.
Too fun.
So, here we are. Kathleen Lynch, How to Build an Owl. 1. Decide you must. 2. Develop deep respect for feather, bone, claw. 3. Place your trembling thumb where the heart will be. For 100 hours, watch so you will know where to put the first feather. 4. Stay awake forever. When the bird takes shape, gently pry open its beak and whisper into it, mouse. 5. Let it go. It's so good.
I love it. And it does remind me of Lynch's kits.
Yeah.
His artworks, his fish kits, and so forth. So
yeah.
Wonderful,
it
uncanny resonance.
Back. I know, in a very shocking way, in a very surprising way.
So we just had to share it.
Yes.
Well, thank you once again for listening to The Full Blossom of the Evening. We'll sign off with...
It was Laura, and she's come to kiss you goodbye.
Goodbye, listeners.
Goodbye.